was definitely on my street.
All righty.
When I first moved there.
There we go.
It's just us.
It's like, yep, and folks online.
Oh.
Yep.
Hi.
All right. There we go.
I'm sure it's
So let's see. Today's class is on rose, and I happen to have a rose that was blooming from my garden with a little bud coming up from it. So we're going to be playing with rose in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different types of medicine we get from rose. All of it is absolutely delightful. So, so there for you folks online, you get a little bit of some rose there too. So we're going to start with rose tea. And what we do in these classes is I'm going to be pouring you some tea and then playing around with some other things. We're going to taste it and just kind of sit with it and just pay attention to what it does in our body, and we'll kind of discuss what's happening in the body and what the chemistry of that is, what the physiological effects are. I don't really want that closed because we have air coming in there. So, but if we have many more of those coming by, hope everyone is okay. So we're going to start with rose tea, rose petal tea. Abejita, happy to be here. I love rose medicine. I know rose medicine is so good. And Rosa, this is a class just for you. Rosa, your name is the genus of the rose family. So this tea is for Rosa. Now, I just put this in just as you folks came in about 3 minutes ago. I put some rose tea in here. And the reason for that is I really wanted to minimize the length of time that the rose was in the water. And we'll explain why that is as we go through the chemistry of rose. But right now, we're just going to, first we're going to breathe it in. So we want to see whenever we have a cup of tea, have you ever had rose as a tea before, just by itself?
rose hips.
Rose petals like
No.
this.
Not
Yes.
fresh.
Not fresh, yeah. So this is dried, but the same thing. Many people haven't. This is something that tends to be more unusual. Sometimes you'll see rose in combination formulas, but just by itself. And it's always a good idea to try something by itself so that you can see this is what rose is like on its own. That's going to help you to blend with other formulas a little bit more effectively as well. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to breathe in the steam. And we can get some of that rose, that fragrance, right? So the aromatics in the plant are carried by the steam. And rose aromatics, the essential oils of rose, have a very uplifting, euphoric effect on the body. And so we use rose aromatherapeutically, rose essential oil, we will use quite often for that, the exhilarant effect, for uplifting the senses, and for that, that sensual effect, right? It has a really lovely, powerful effect on just kind of enhancing our sensory input. I have a rose bush called Apothecary rose. Yeah, Rosa, that is a great rose. Apothecary rose is one of the older traditional species of rose. And those are really beneficial when you want a medicinal rose, right? And you can just tell from the name, Apothecary rose. So great, that is good medicine, and you can use the fresh flowers, the petals or the hips. So the essential oil is carried here. So the steam would be effective when we need that kind of that uplifting, euphoric, happy effect from rose. We don't always have therapeutic compounds carried by steam. So this is organoleptic testing. We are testing for the presence of compounds in the in the steam, checking to see, is this a good way to use the medicine of the plant? Some of the medicine of the plant is going to be carried in the steam. Some is not. And so we'll be looking at the difference there. But certainly rose, it seems to be a very good plant for steam medicine. So now we can take this in as a sip, and we're going to hold it in our mouth as you are able. You know, it's hot, so some people are more sensitive to heat. So hold it in your mouth, and you're going to check for flavors, but also for any changes to the tissues in your mouth. So just experience what happens when you sip the tea. So can you taste those aromatic compounds in there?
Yeah, predominantly.
Tastes like rose. It's very light. It's not a strong flavor. And the reason for that is rose has a very small amount of aromatic compounds, a very, very minute amount, to the point that it takes approximately 2,000 pounds of rose petals to make 1 pound, which is 16 ounces of a rose essential oil. It takes a room full, I don't even know how much this room, maybe a couple of rooms full of rose petals. It is very aromatic sometimes, because there's some roses that are not aromatic. It's very aromatic, but those aromatic compounds are very volatile and very, very unstable. And so when we're catching that steam, we're catching those aromatics, and we're tasting it, we're tasting those aromatics, we're getting that therapeutic effect of rose essential oil in the steam and in the food. And that's a nice thing, because if you were to buy, essential oils generally come in a little bottle this size. If you were to buy rose essential oil, in this size would be about $150 if you were to get true rose essential oil, because it takes such a huge amount of roses. So you can pay $150 to get some rose oil to uplift your senses, and then be depressed because you paid $150 for a tiny little bottle of oil, make you mad, or you can start growing some roses. And you want to grow roses that are aromatic if the aromatics are part of the medicine of the plant that you want. So we're going to talk about all of the medicine of the plant, and it may be at times for specific purposes that you don't care about the aromatics. But that's the aromatics. So when we're tasting those, when we're smelling those, we're getting that euphoric effect. In Unani Tib medicine, which is Middle Eastern, Pakistani, that area of medicine, it is often referred to as an exhilarant, a plant that exhilarates us. And indeed it does. When it has those aromatics are exhilarating. So you may also notice, now it's not so much in this batch of tea, although maybe I should give you another batch after you drink this. I'm going to give you another batch that's steeped a little bit longer. In your cup of tea that you're drinking right now, in my cup of tea, because I extracted for such a short period of time, the reason I did that was to maximize those aromatics coming out so we could really get a sense of those, and to minimize the other characteristic compounds. So there's 3 primary classes of therapeutic chemicals in roses. So one of them is the essential oils. Okay, and essential oils, we've tested for the presence of those. They're not always there. You'll have some roses that are absolutely not aromatic, that are beautiful colors, that are gorgeous, but more and more many of the growers who are growing roses and who are hybridizing roses, selecting roses for specific properties, right? They're selecting for a specific color or a size or a growth pattern. They may lose some of the aromatics because they're not looking at the aromatics. They're not paying attention for that to that when they're selecting for creating a purple rose, right? And so the rose fragrance can go down, and that's why using some of the older species of rose, like Rosa has, the Apothecary rose, dog rose, Rosa rugosa. There's an old named rose, which is what this one is, which is called Mrs. Lincoln.
Oh, I know this one.
Yeah, Mrs. Lincoln has a deep red color, and it's a very aromatic. It is hundreds of years old, but it is a very aromatic and beautiful rose. So, yeah. So essential oils are beneficial for that uplifting effect. They are what give rose that uplifting effect. If you have a rose that is not aromatic, it's unlikely that you're going to be getting that particular quality from that rose because the chemistry isn't there. And you can tell that the chemistry is there by what? Smelling it. Yes, there's a very cute puppy going by. I get very distracted by cute puppies going by. Yes, so the second category of chemistry of rose is tannins. Tannins. Now, tannins are something that we're always going to find in this family. This is one of the reasons that we teach the family of medicinal plants. You know that if a plant comes from the Rosaceae family, if it's in the rose family, it is likely to have tannins in it. Hi, cutie. Hi, baby. We have a big, floppy, adorable dog outside. So tannins are always going to be found in roses. It's one of the primary medicines of rose. Now, we can minimize or maximize tannin extraction. So tannins like to extract into water, and they like to extract with heat, and they like time. So modifying any of those things, you're going to minimize extraction of tannins. So your first cup of tea had a low tannin content. But I'm going to give you another cup of tea because now it's had time and heat and water. So drink it up.
So the tannins, are they what I'm feeling like coating my mouth?
Yep, and we're going to feel that even more right now.
Ooh, look at the color. Yeah. Ooh, drink up.
Yeah, and you can see, yes, that the pigments have also extracted a little bit more. That first cup of tea had all those tiny little volatile aromatic compounds. Now we're getting some of the pigmentation. That's another thing that we're going to talk about, right? So we have those red pigments are coming out. We still have those aromatics are still there. And now when we drink this, you're likely to have a stronger tightening effect on the tissues of the mouth. Right? And that is from the tannins. So tannins are, the action that you're feeling is astringency. They are astringent. And this is a really common quality of many plants. We will talk about astringency. I'll move this to the other side so you can see that. Tannins are abundant in the plant world. Plants use tannins for protection, for keeping themselves, the structure of plants, intact. And we borrow that chemistry of the plants for our own uses, to keep structures intact. And so when we drink something that is rich in tannins, the tannins are going to bind with the proteins in the mouth. They grab onto the proteins in the mouth and they make those proteins firmer. They tighten the junctures. And so we have tissue that is less resistant to proteolysis. Lysis is breakdown, proteo is proteins. So the breakdown of proteins. There are proteolytic enzymes that are in saliva in our body, and there's proteolytic processes of inflammation and tissue deterioration and trauma in the body that reduce the integrity and the health of tissues. And when tannins come in contact with those tissues that are traumatized, inflamed, weak, they grab onto them and they tighten them, they make them stronger. And that's what we're feeling in our mouth. So, yes.
When it's would you use something like this topically?
Yeah, absolutely. What can you imagine that type of activity would be beneficial for topically?
Bruising.
Mm-hmm.
Well, any type of infection,
Mm-hmm.
because it would barrier.
Right.
The drawing.
Yeah, the drawing.
Like
Yeah.
a bite.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes, the red hot bug bites, bee stings. Yes. Also cuts, wounds. It will stop bleeding in wounds because it's astringing, tightening those tissues. So tannins are very strongly styptic. So
Like a styptic pencil.
like a styptic pencil. A styptic pencil uses alum, which is a magnesium aluminum silicate combination. You can get a styptic effect from using a very strong rose extract. If you boiled the tea, if you took roses and you boiled them in water for 10 minutes, you'd have a really strong tannin effect. You'd be maximizing all those tannins. The essential oils would be gone, right? That long boiling would volatilize all of those. They'd just be in the air. Your house would smell lovely. Your tea, you would not be able to taste that rose flavor, right? So sometimes you have to give up one to maximize the other, but we can absolutely use rose or any family that's in the rose family, or any plant that's in the rose family for this tannin, for this astringency. So a poultice, absolutely. A poultice on a sunburn, right? Roses are great on sunburns or any kind of burn, right? Where you have lost that tissue integrity, you've damaged the surface of the tissue, of the surface of the skin, and now you have that heat, right? Redness and swelling and pain is heat signs, and rose cools heat in the body. So it's tightening those tissues down and it's cooling heat. Very, very beneficial if that's what you need. And irrespective of what the color or the fragrance or anything of the rose, what it looks like, if it's aromatic or not, if it's white or yellow or peach, it's always going to have tannins. That's always a quality of rose medicine, but we may minimize it by extracting for a short period of time. So we're selecting for the essential oils, or maximize it by boiling. We can also minimize by bringing water to a boil and then dropping the heat down a little bit. So we're at 200 degrees, right? A little bit under 200 degrees. This is one of the reasons why green tea, which is another rich source of tannins, oftentimes to make the best tea, we let the water sit. We let the water drop down a little bit before we add it to the tea, and then we extract for a short period of time. We don't leave it in there brewing for a long time because we are going to minimize the tannins, but maximize extraction of everything else. So tannins are one of our primary first aid chemicals in plants, and very good for those heat signs. So the other compound that is going to be in rose is going to be the pigment. Now, this also is going to depend on the plant that we're looking at, right? So essential oil levels may or may not be there. Pigments may or not be there, may or may not be there. Tannins, always going to be there. Always going to get, if you are extracting for them. So the most, and for all of this, we are talking about the rose flower. We're going to go into the rose fruit in just a little bit and talk about the differences there. But here we're talking about the flower of the plant. So here we have rose with a red pigment, right? And this red pigment we can also see in our tea. If we extract it for a longer period of time, we're going to get that. Is the concentration the same? Nope, there's a higher amount here, but we've got some extraction there. If we extracted for a longer period of time, we would get more. By the way, I'm going to send around. This is a rose glycerite. So glycerin is a way of extracting compounds from plants that is non-alcoholic. It has a sweet flavor. There's no sugar in here, but it's a sugar alcohol, so it has a sweet flavor. And when we're passing around tinctures in a group like this, we are going to put them. I like to put them in this little hollow in between your forefinger and your thumb. If you stretch it, you have a little carrying case right there, and it's nice because it's an area that generally tends not to get dirty, right? It's not on the surface of your hand, so it's not getting in contact with things. It's just kind of tucked away. But you can put little things there and take them.
Salt with tequila.
Salt and tequila, absolutely.
Hence where
Yes.
that came from, you know?
So
The cleanest spot.
it is the cleanest spot. So this is an extract of rose, and with this one, you can see that pigment in there. Now I cheat a little bit with this because rose doesn't have a huge amount of the color, and we can see that. And I love that color. I know, isn't that delicious?
Tannin.
So I increase the pigment in there because the chemistry is exactly the same by adding a little bit of hibiscus, right? And that's also where that tartness comes from with there too. So the hibiscus increased the red color of that, but that hibiscus has the same pigment that we see right here, and that pigment is anthocyanins. So anthocyanins are the dark red, blue, purple colored pigments in plants. So when we're looking at cherries and blueberries and elderberry and red cabbage and red roses, but not beets and not tomatoes and not watermelon, not tuna, the cactus fruits. Those are a different red chemical, but most reds come from these anthocyanins. And anthocyanins are helpful at strengthening blood vessel walls. Right? So they help to strengthen blood vessels. They improve circulation throughout the body when we have conditions like bruising, varicose veins, spider veins, rosacea, poor circulation to the extremities. Any kind of condition where we can see that the vasculature just isn't strong and healthy and elastic, right? Elevated blood pressure, atherosclerosis is kind of a late stage indication of that weakness of the tissue. So in order to protect against blood pressure problems and atherosclerosis, any type of circulatory conditions, also circulatory conditions that come inevitably from things like diabetes, right? In diabetes, we have elevated levels of insulin, either from medication or in type 2 diabetes because the pancreas is just pumping out insulin. It's not getting into the bloodstream. Elevated insulin always causes damage to blood vessels and nerves. Always does. Insulin damages those. And so there is an inevitability of circulatory problems and neurological problems in the extremities of the body in people with diabetes and also pre-diabetic conditions, right?
I have a little question.
Yeah, hold on just a minute. I tried making that from the rose video. It's delicious. Oh, the rose glycerite. Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you tried it. It is. You always want to have that around, right? Everyone needs to have rose glycerite around. Yes.
Is that what you're discussing here now, is having rose glycerite around these arterial wall issues?
I'm talking about the color, the pigment.
Just the pigment.
Just the pigment, yeah. So this is applicable to any plant that has that deep red color. Yes, yeah. And so it is more applicable to hibiscus than to rose. And you can tell that because if you make a cup of hibiscus tea, it's going to turn deep red much more quickly than a cup of rose tea, right? So the rose has some. We're definitely getting it in there. It's definitely got more than if we had a yellow rose or a white rose or a peach rose, right? So a glyceride tincture is, whoopsie. Hi, Marcos, by the way, and hi, Karina. So a glycerin tincture is better at extraction of the components of roses. Let's see. Yeah. So the components of rose aren't generally, I mean, they're soluble in water, and I generally think of glycerin as a good solvent for things that are soluble in water, right? It's just more stable. You're making a liquid extract, not using alcohol, using glycerin. Things that are more non-polar that you would use alcohol to extract in don't really extract in glycerin. So I generally think of glycerin as just being a way of making a water extract in a more concentrated and more stable form. And all of the components of roses happen to be water soluble. So yes, Marcos, but yeah, just because of that. You could make an alcohol extract of rose. You'd want to keep the alcohol level pretty low because most of this likes water. All right, so pigmentation is the other compound that you're just generally going to see in rose. So rose medicine, rose flower medicine, we're looking at these as the primary compounds of interest. Yeah. Let's talk about rose hips now. So the Rosaceae family is a family that produces a lot of fruits. Many fruits are in this family. Blackberries and strawberries and the stone fruit, peaches and apples and pears and plums and cherries are all members of this family. This family likes to produce flowers, and those flowers produce fruit. And rose is the same way. So we have a flower, and the flower, when it's done, produces a fruit. And the fruit is rose hips. So this is rose hips tea. So now we're going to go to that. We have a little friend here. Oh, I think you came off of the rose. Baby. We have a little beetle here. Hi, do you want to go back on? I'm sorry to have disturbed you. Come on, you can go back on. It's like, no, I don't trust you. I understand your distrust, but I don't want you right there because you're going to get squished. Okay, we can go outside. I'm sorry, hold on. I'm rescuing a beetle. He's kind of cute. See him?
Aw,
Little beetle.
little rose beetle,
Tiny rose
little
beetle.
protein for the tea.
So what were other roses here? Peaches, plums, cherries, rose, all stone.
All right,
Blackberries.
back to work. So I've got a little strainer here. We're going to strain out. Now the rose hips tea, I made it before the fruit tea. Yeah. Mm. There, you two can sip on that.
Is that beaker?
It is. It is. Now I'm also going to give you some of the mark. There's a vocabulary word for you. M-A-R-C, mark, is the leftover plant material after you extract it. So the plant's at the bottom right here, right? This is the mark from making our tea. And I'm going to get some of that for you. Because it is fruit. It's dried fruit. Rose hips are the dried fruit of the rose family. So these are dried fruit that have reconstituted, basically. We've been soaking them in water. So you can just kind of nibble on this.
Yes.
And see what you think. So those are the hips. Now, so when we breathe in our tea, one more thing. Rose, from the petals, this is rose hydrosol. This is a distillation of rose petals using a still like our copper still over there.
Okay.
So good during hot weather. When we distill water, when we distill aromatics, We leave behind a lot of the larger molecules, including the minerals that are in the water. Distilled water has no minerals, has no dissolved solids in it, right? It's purified through the distillation process. And products of distillation, like the rose water, leaves behind a lot of those aromatic compounds and just has the water, the distilled water, and those low molecular weight, tiny little aromatic compounds in there. So the distillation of the water makes the pH of the water rise just a little bit. So the pH of that hydrosol is about 5.5, which is exactly the pH that skin likes to be in. So we can use hydrosols like that to spray onto our skin because they shift that pH to a more acidic pH, which is what our skin likes. So that can help with cooling heat in the skin, cooling inflammation in the skin, and gives a little bit of that toning effect. However, tannins are also big molecules, and so tannins do not pass over distillation. And I say that because a lot of products of distillation, like rose water, they claim to have a lot of tannins and they're going to astringe your face. Well, they're not. There's not much tannins in there. I see you can clean your glasses with them.
Yes, I did.
So we want to remember that there's just not a lot of tannins in the thing. What do you think about internal use of hydrosols? So the amount of aromatics, I think that internal use of hydrosols is fine. In fact, that's one of the keys. And Karina, I don't remember if this is in the video, but in the hydrosol that I make, I replace the water that sorry, not the hydrosol. I said hydrosol, what I meant was glycerite. In the glycerite that I make, I use the rose hydrosol as the water portion of that to bump up the aromatics in that. It works really, really nicely. And rose water is often used as a flavoring agent. A lot of the rose water that is used as a flavoring agent out there is synthetic. It does not have natural rose in it. And you can sort of tell because it's like $3 for a big old bottle of it. We already know how expensive rose aromatics are. You can't get a $3 bottle of true rose anything. So internal use of hydrosol, particularly rose, we know that it is safe and it is effective. Most hydrosols are pretty safe to use in dilution, right? They have a fraction of a drop of aromatics, of essential oils in a spray, so or in a dose. So it's very, very safe. If you want to use aromatics, but want to use them in a safer way, hydrosols are the way to go about that. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. All right, so rose hips. Now this is the fruit. And so we don't have any of those aromatics, right? The aromatics are in the flower.
Totally smells like fruit.
Smells like fruit. Smells very much like dried fruit. It smells like dried peaches, right? Because it's dried peach's cousin.
Tannins are there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely get that astringency, that sour, puckery thing. The astringency is dropped though because the tannins tend to reduce as fruit forms. Tannins turn into other types of organic acids. And one of the primary organic acids we're tasting here, so we can tell that there's a lot of acids. We can tell that there's more acids in here than in rose because it's sour, right? Sour, again, using our senses to check for the presence of stuff. So we have a couple of different acids in rose hips. The primary one being ascorbic acid. Ascorbic acid is another name for what? Do you know?
Vitamin C.
Vitamin C. You got it. Yeah. So this is one of the richest sources of vitamin C. You'll see rose hips referred to as a source of vitamin C very, very, very often. It has a lot of vitamin C in it. However, vitamin C is an unstable molecule, and it is sensitive to heat. when we heat foods, we damage the ascorbic acid, not 100% of it, but a significant amount of it. So one of the downsides to making a tea of rose hips, pouring boiling water on there, is that we are damaging some of those that ascorbic acid. Now, there are also flavonoids, lots and lots and lots of flavonoids also found in rose hips, and there's also carotenoids. So we have lots of flavonoids and carotenoids and organic acids in this fruit. This is something that we often see in fruit. We see flavonoids and ascorbic acid and carotenoids. This is kind of the chemistry of fruit, right? All of these are strong antioxidants. They're all strong anti-inflammatory compounds, very important, very therapeutic compounds. Carotenoids, the best known one is beta carotene, right, which is converted into vitamin A by the body. Yeah, so this is really beneficial. And those acids were converted from tannins. Tannin content in fruit tends to be higher in the unripe fruit. That's why when you eat an apple, an unripe apple, it's going to really pucker the body, the skin, because the apple was protecting that juvenile fruit from being eaten too early. The seeds weren't developed yet. A plant creates a fruit to be eaten by an animal and then pooped out somewhere else. So you get movement of the fruit and a little bit of some compost, right? But it doesn't want that too early, because if an animal eats the fruit too early, then the seeds won't be ripe and they will not germinate. So fruits tend to have a high amount of tannins as they're unripe, and as they get older, those tannins convert into acids. So we see more of that acidity, and also sugar, right? We also see a lot of sugars in these.
How
Okay.
does this compare to lectins? Have you heard this?
Lectins are different, and I'll go into those later, but yeah, they're a different category of compounds. So this is the chemistry that we're hitting here. Now, ascorbic acid is damaged by heat, but flavonoids and carotenoids are not. In fact, the heat is enhancing extraction of these compounds. So we can, if we eat the little pieces of fruit that I gave you, could you make it as a sun tea to retain the vitamin C? Yeah, exactly. So minimizing the use of heat in your rose hips preparations is going to protect the vitamin C, and you got there before I did. So yes, you can make a sun tea. You can make pour it into a container and put it outside, and you'll get that tea there. You can also make this. So this is called an electuary. An electuary is old school medicine making. This is a honey base. So if you don't eat honey, you may not want some of this. I will take yours happily. This is, I'm going to show you what it looks like. In fact, I'm just going to pull it out with my hands. This is just a chunk. This is rose hips electuary. So this is rose hips that have been ground, not heated, and then mixed with honey.
Candy.
It's totally candy. It's delicious candy. Right?
Tart, sweet,
Tart, sweet.
whole thing.
It's so good.
Even the texture is fantastic.
It's like fruit leathers, right? It's like fruit leather. It is a great way to ingest rose hips because these are all very beneficial. One of the other downsides to the tea, so the tea is great at extracting the flavonoids. We're going to get that. We're also getting, you may have noticed with the tea, that it had a little bit of a thickness to it, a body to it, because all of the fruits of the Rosaceae family also contain a lot of pectin, right? And pectin is a thickener. So the tea is going to have quite a lot of pectin in it. This electuary has quite a lot of pectin in it. What should I do with other marks for teas I've made? Sometimes you feel bad or wasteful just throwing the mark in the trash. Totally. So the primary thing that you can do is compost with it. Take it outside and put it on the ground underneath your favorite plant or just whatever plant is outside. Rotate through putting the tea there, the mark there. I totally understand. Yes, there's a lot of beneficial stuff in mark. We never extract 100% of the chemistry of the plant. But mark is really, really good for compost. So throwing it into your compost or just taking it outside and dump it underneath a plant. Don't do it in your potted plants at home because the mark is moist and tends to get all moldy, which is not fun underneath your beautiful monstera. But you don't care about it underneath a tree outside, right? So that's fine, or a bush. But that's what you should do with your mark. You can also use mark for other purposes. And I don't really want to go into that right now, but if we run out of stuff to talk about today within time, probably not going to happen. We can, or you can ask me about that another time and we'll give you some ideas about what to do with leftover mark. That actually could be a whole class in and of itself because there's a lot to do with it. The other downside to this is that carotenoids are not water soluble. So we weren't getting any carotenoids. They're in the fruit. They were in here when we were nibbling. They were what's left over. In this mark down here are all of the carotenoids of rose hips. They're not in the water because they're not water soluble. They're down here because they are non-polar. They're oil soluble or alcohol soluble. So here, Marcus, you, making an alcohol extract of rose hips would extract those carotenoids. However, it would damage the vitamin C because vitamin C is damaged by alcohol. So if you're just eating them like this, then you don't have to worry about solubility of compounds. You're getting 100% of all of the chemistry of the plant. You haven't heated it. You don't need to worry about solubility. You're just ingesting it.
So you just pureed the petals.
No. I ground the rose hips.
I should have said rose hip. I haven't been stupid today.
That's okay. Yeah. So I get the fruit. Now, when you buy rose hips, you always want to buy them crushed.
Okay.
What's called cut and sifted. So they're kind of crushed up into smaller pieces and they're sifted out. And that's important because rose hips contain tiny little hairs. I don't know if any of you have ever bought whole rose hips thinking that the whole plant is going to be better than the processed plant. A very reasonable assumption to make and generally true. However, with whole rose hips, you have those tiny little hairs in there that you cannot, I mean, you can sift out at the end, but if you want to use the rose hips, if you want to ingest the mark, those hairs are going to get in the way. So, so cut and sifted, they've sifted out all of those hairs. You have just the fruit and you can grind it up in a coffee grinder or mortar and pestle or whatever, put it into your honey, stir it in, have it be thinner than you would like it to be because that pectin is going to thicken up over a couple of days. So mix it in until you're like, I would like this to be a little bit thicker, considerably thicker. That's a perfect amount. You can always add in more later. So you're just going to mix it in. You don't have to heat it. Put it into a jar, cover it, and set it aside for a couple of days. Come back and you will have an electuary. It's ridiculously easy to
How do
do.
you spell that? E-L-E-C-T-U-R-Y.
Right there.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I love electuaries as ways of working with plants that are delicious. And this is one of the most delicious of the electuaries.
Question, what
Yes.
else can you suspend this with? Where'd you come? What else can you?
You can use date
Oh,
syrup. Date syrup is really delicious. Trader Joe's now has it. Yeah, it's gorgeous. You could use agave syrup also. The sugar in the honey is part of the preservation system here.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So you want something that actually does have sugars because they are preserving.
So,
So yeah, date syrup and agave are good options. All right, so we use rose hips as sources of ascorbic acid, flavonoids, carotenoids. Again, structural integrity of the body. Vitamin C, ascorbic acid, is necessary for the manufacture of collagen. Our body cannot make collagen without vitamin C. That's why vitamin C is a vitamin. The term vitamin actually has a specific meaning, vita, life, right? We can't exist without this. If it has the official designation of a vitamin, it means you'll die if you don't get this compound. There's other compounds that we can have that optimize health, that are nourishing and strengthening. So many of them. That is herbalism, right? Is all of the other chemistry other than the 13 that have been designated by the government as we can't live without this stuff, right? The government hasn't designated flavonoids or the other carotenoids as vitamins because they're, but they are necessary for optimal health and stability. However, you'll fall apart without ascorbic acid. That is what scurvy is. Right? Scurvy is ascorbic acid deficiency, and in scurvy you have wounds that don't heal, you have teeth fall out, you have just the body starts falling apart because it cannot make collagen. So if you are presenting with collagen deficiency, what does collagen deficiency look like? Your tissue isn't strong and healthy and elastic. Your body isn't able to repair itself. Vitamin C deficiency is pretty common because a lot of people don't eat fresh raw fruits and vegetables. And ascorbic acid is damaged by heat and storage. So fresh raw fruits and vegetables are the way to go. So vitamin C, rose hips are a great source of that. There are other plants that are also rich in vitamin C that we can use, but rose hips are handy and delicious and very accessible. About that, how hot should our water be when making tea? You don't use the seeds. Oh, Abahita, good point. So the seeds of the rose, I should have brought rose hip seed oil. The seeds of the fruit are very, very hard, and generally we don't use them. They can be extracted. There are a number of carotenoids and fatty acids, unique fatty acids that are found in rosehip seeds that are really supportive and healthy for the skin. They don't have vitamin C in them. Sometimes people will say rosehip seed oil is vitamin C. No, it doesn't, because vitamin C is a water-soluble compound. It's not oil-soluble, so it's not going to be found in the oil. It can't be. There are oil-soluble forms of vitamin C, but they're synthetically made and they're not found in the rosehip seeds. The rosehip seeds have carotenoids, they have fatty acids, they have other compounds in them. So you can take those seeds and grind them up and extract them into oil, do an oil infusion of rosehip seeds. That's not the same thing as rosehip seed oil, which is pressed out of the seeds. It's just the pure seed of the rosehips and nothing else. But you can make that at home. Right? But what you can do is you can grind those seeds and extract them in oil, and you'll have, basically rosehip seed oil added to an oil, diluted into an oil. So you can, otherwise we don't use the seeds. They're not very beneficial. There are a lot of them. They're really hard. They're kind of a bother. But that's one of the things if you do want to use the whole of the plant. How hot should our water be when making tea? It kind of depends on what you're extracting. I do like to minimize heat when I'm working with rose. It's a very delicate plant. It doesn't need much heat. It doesn't need heat to extract the aromatics or the pigment. It doesn't need heat to extract the vitamin C or the pectins or the flavonoids in the hips. The only thing that the heat is going to extract in the roses better than anything else is the tannins. So if the tannin chemistry is what you want from the roses, yeah, you can bring the water all the way up to a boil, throw it on the roses, and let it steep for a long period of time to maximize those tannins. But otherwise, minimize the heat, minimize the time. So how hot should it be? Less than boiling, 200 degrees-ish. I don't measure my tea. I just kind of, if it has come all the way to a boil in my kettle, I'll take it off and just let it sit, or I might add a little bit of water to it. Okay, so we have rosehip seed. We can use the other parts of rose, the bark and the leaves, the stems of rose are good sources of tannins. They don't have any of the other chemistry. They're just tannins. But sometimes you want tannins around, right? Tannins are a good thing to have in your first aid kit. If you have a big old hunkin' rose tree and you want to do something with it, you can strip the bark and let it dry, chop it up, and keep it in your first aid kit for when you need tannins. Quick tannins available. Pour some water, boiling water in them, let them sit, and then you can apply those to wounds or burns or, any time where you need that tannin activity. That being said, a much easier source of tannins to keep in your first aid kit, and I do this, is black tea bags, Lipton tea. Just put a couple of Lipton tea bags in your first aid kit, and when you need tannins, take a tea bag, put it into water, pour boiling water over it, let it sit for a little while. You've made a cup of tea for someone. And then you've also got the tea bag as a little compress, right? It's already a little compress. You can just put that straight onto a bug bite or a bee sting or a wound or a burn or anything like that. Hi, Teresa, you're late. Well, you'll just be able to go back and watch the whole thing later. We have been playing it with rose in many different forms, so you've got a lot to watch. Let's see, any questions about the rose hips or the fruit? No. All right.
Excellent teaching.
Thank you. Excellent plant. One other use of roses that I do want to talk about. This is more woo-woo-y stuff. So Teresa, you're just in time for the woo-woo-y stuff. Roses have thorns. Here's a little rose thorn right there. Ah, baby, they're pretty significant. Roses have thorns. Some roses have a lot of thorns. Some have only a few thorns. Rose as thorn medicine. Roses teach us about boundaries. Teaches us about boundaries in a lot of different ways. So we can look at the boundary medicine of rose. Rose has these gorgeous, voluptuous roses, right? This is just, you just have to smell it. It's just so beautiful. Whoops. So it's soft and it's velvety and it's aromatic and it's beautiful. It is just sensual, right? It's just a gorgeous rose. I love that rose bush. I had peach roses, unscented peach roses at my house when we first bought it, and was like, these will not do at all. So sorry, I pulled them out. And then one of my students gave me a cutting of her, Mrs. Lincoln, Gina, and so I was able to propagate that and plant that. Yes. So beautiful, voluptuous, gorgeous, also has thorns. And so the message that rose gives us is that we are allowed, we are encouraged, we have the right to be as present and open and voluptuous and sexy and aromatic and over the top. We have the right to be present in all of that. And we also always have the right to our boundaries. We never give up the right to our boundaries just because we are beautiful and sensual and voluptuous and sexy, right? Both of those things are true. We get the right to boundaries. We get the right to show up in whatever way we want. So rose medicine just reminds us of that. Says, do not shut yourself down. Don't change what you're wearing. Don't change whatever you look like to protect someone else, because they can protect themselves. You have this right. So rose medicine is really, really beneficial. Are all roses, heirlooms, and hybrids equal in benefits? Well, Teresa, you just have to go back and watch the whole thing, because we have talked about all of that. They're not. The quality of roses is going to be the same. So irrespective of what species that you have, what hybrid, what cultivar, basically to compartmentalize the class for you, it really has everything to do with what is the color, what is the fragrance, right? With the color and the fragrance, you're going to be able to ascertain the qualities associated with those. If they don't have the fragrance, they still have the color qualities. If they don't have the color, they still have the fragrance qualities. If they have neither, they have the tannins qualities. But yeah, we have gone into that. Is it okay to put the rose petals in oil to make rose oil, and rose would be best? Okay, so Rosa, if you want to make a rose infused oil, you need to have an aromatic plant. It has to be aromatics, because the only things that extract into oil from roses are the aromatics. The pigments don't, the tannins don't, just the aromatics. So get a dried roses that are fragrant and put them into a jar and cover them with oil and extract them for a few days and pour that out. Get a new batch of dried roses, put them in, take that same batch of oil that was on the first batch of roses that you've strained out and put that in. Let them sit for a couple of days. Strain that out. Take a new batch of roses. So this is called charging the oil. And you can charge rose oil up to 4 to 6 times, depending on how aromatic the roses are. And every time you're going to get a little bit more of those rose aromatics into the oil. Rose aromatics are very, very low. There's not a lot of essential oils in there. So you need to do it repeatedly. If you make a rose infused oil and you just have one charge, it's unlikely that it's going to smell like much of anything at all. And it will never turn red. It'll never turn pink, because anthocyanins aren't soluble in oil. They are only soluble in water. They're only going to extract into the water. So if you ever see a pink rose oil and it says, oh, it's from roses. No, it isn't. It can't be. There's a beautifully produced YouTube video of a woman making handmade cosmetics. And it shows her in her garden hand picking roses and hibiscus and grinding them up with oil. And then she pours it out and she has this deep red colored oil. And I'm watching it going, no, that can't happen. That did not happen. You can't get that. The anthocyanins in the hibiscus and the rose aren't soluble in water. You did not get that red color from the roses that you gorgeously. It's a very amusing video because like it's dead wrong. Like that didn't just happen. There was some magic in the middle of that, because you can't get there from here. So I have 17 roses to pick from. Ooh, Rosa. Yeah.
Ooh, nice.
Well, then you're going to make some awesome rose oil from that. Yeah. Let's see. So that's roses. Rose has so much high cutie. Roses have so much medicine in them, depending on how they're presenting and depending on the different form that we're using. Damask rose and Mr. Lincoln. Yes. Yeah. So actually, ooh, that brings up one thing, Rosa. Rosa damascena. Is the one, so generally when we're talking about rose, everything that we've talked about today applies to pretty much anything that is in the Rosa genus. Any kind of hybrid, heirloom, old school wild roses, native roses, all of this applies to them. Damask rose, there are cautions that we will sometimes see applied to damask rose that you do want to be mindful of, and that is primarily that they can have a stronger cleansing effect on the intestines, shall we say, so that you can have some diarrhea, some loose stools. They can have a mild laxative effect. Because of that, also, some people say that the damask roses should not be used internally for pregnant people, because you don't want to be moving energy in the pelvis of a pregnant person. Check the ebb tide rose. It's not so old cultivar, but it's a very dark red color and very aromatic. Also grows well in different climates. Even in Puerto Rico thrives. Ooh, Marcos. Nice ebb tide rose. write that down because I just found out that all of this chatting that you folks do goes away. I've had people make comments in their, I don't know how to screenshot. You say that like I can just do computer stuff. It's a Mac. It's a MacBook. So Ebbtide, Rose, Marcus suggested. Okay, thank you, Marcus. I will look for that one. It sounds awesome. I have Will Scarlet, heirloom rose. Nice red. Yeah, and those heirloom roses, I mean, they're beautiful, right? They are quite far removed from the big red long-stemmed little dead things that not dead but lifeless things that you see around. Which brings up one final thing about roses that we do want to, I said the final thing. Ebbtide. Oh, that is beautiful. Oh, purple. Yeah, it's almost purple. Someone said, Rosa said it's purple. Yeah, such a deep red color. Yum. So it's very aromatic too. Rosa, is that one of the species that you grow? There was one more thing that I wanted to say. Do not use roses from a florist for any of your medicine making. Floral roses are toxic little bullets. They have been so heavily sprayed and treated. You absolutely don't want to be using them, even if you're making a skincare product that our skin absorbs a lot of things. So no floral roses. Find someone growing. You have it. Of course you do. Ah, lovely. Find someone growing it. Go to Rosa's house. She's got 17. She's got all the good roses there. All right. There you go. There's roses. Next week we have, what is it next week? Oh, next week we have marshmallow. Marshmallow, because we are in the middle of summer. We're coming into summer. It's going to be hot. And marshmallow is one of my favorite allies during hot, dry weather. So,
the sugary treat?
No, the herb for which the sugary treat is named because it used to be used to make the sugary treat.
Oh, well.
Yes, come to Texas. Oh, she's the... You must have yellow roses growing there, Rosa, huh? You have to. You have to. You can't have 17 cultivars of rose in Texas and not have a yellow rose. I think they'd kick you out. They'd make you move to California. All right. So I'll see you next week for some marshmallow. Love you all. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
All right.